Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this seminar. My name is Diego Rosenberg, and I'm going to tell you a little story about, it begins with me for a moment, but it's really about this gentleman here, the gentleman from Michigan State University who were part of Project W31. A few years ago, I was working on a book. I got a book deal, and this is it. This is the product, which you can buy from me afterwards. Shameless promotion. And it was about automotive marketing. And I was talking with Casey Martin, the gentleman over there, and he found a Society of Automotive Engineers magazine from 1970 from Michigan State University that had all the drivers, or all the members of this team of pictures we've seen on Facebook. So that started the ball rolling to get in touch with these gentlemen and tell the story of these pictures we saw in Facebook. Now, I told a little bit of the story in my book, but we were able to expand it and with more people, which is currently in the current edition of MCACN. But at this point, there's nothing to hear from me, but I'm going to let these gentlemen tell you the rest of the story. Thank you.
Thanks, Diego. My name is Paul Rand, and I spent my career after graduation from Michigan State University in the brake industry, and I'm going to introduce the team members here and briefly say where they spent their careers. We will not spend a lot of time on this because we want to tell you the story of the car. Far left, we have Bob Sank. He spent his career in transmissions. Al Wilson was in exotic metals. Bob Sedlak was an aerodynamic expert. Bob Dennis spent his time with the instrument panels. Fred Mullen was in harnesses and wiring. Dennis Klein is a vehicle designer. Jim Menaker was in the engine end of the business. Rick Dolan was in lighting. So you'd say we probably have the car pretty well engineered here up on stage. And you're looking at about excess of 350 years of automotive engineering experience amongst the team here. I'm going to get right into the story. Basically, this story is about a bunch of guys in 1969 through 73 who were given a car by Oldsmobile and raced the car and prepared the car. And we're going to tell you that story today. Jim, do you want to tell the group how we ended up getting the car from Oldsmobile?
Thanks, Paul. So we're a group of engineering, primarily mechanical engineering students. The one exception is Dennis Klein, who's our designer. We got together with the Society of Automotive Engineers student chapter that met once a month, every Thursday once a month, and basically to interact with other students and try to learn a little bit about the industry and actually get a little bit away from the studies for a while. So after that event on every Thursday night, we would adjourn to our favorite watering hole, which was Monty's Tavern, and we had a big round table called the Round Table that we sat and drank beer and did some bench racing. And with us was our two engineering advisors, a fellow by the name of Jim Miller from Oldsmobile Engineering, another fellow by the name of Joe Guzik, who was from Motor Wheel. And we would tell our stories of all our adventures and background and knowledge that we had reaped over our 20 or 21 years. And they would sit and discuss and say, I think guys, I don't know anything. If you're all talk here, if we were to give you a car, an Oldsmobile, do you think you would race it? So we were shocked with that. We convened for about 5 minutes and talked amongst ourselves and said, I think we could do this. I really think we could do this. To which we responded, yes, we'll do it. They had, so Jim Miller went back to Olds Engineering. He talked to Dale Smith, who was really the backbone of all things Olds clandestine, out the back door racing. And said, yeah, we will give you a car. Tell us what you're looking for. We'll give you a car on one condition. You've got to have a place to work on it. You can't just have it out in the street. You've got to have a place to work on it. So that's where the challenge is picked up by Rick Dolan. Rick will give you the story in a minute.
Good afternoon. As you might know, we are Michigan State Spartans. And that word Spartan clearly describes the garage or workshop that we were given to build this project in. It was really just a wood frame agricultural building that had two components that we were really concerned about: security, and it had to be dry. It was both of those, and that worked for us. It was absolutely nothing palatial. The only infrastructure that it had was an old Lincoln tombstone welder, a set of acetylene torches, and a hydraulic floor jack. In fact, the floor was half asphalt and mostly dirt. We shared the space with a lot of agricultural equipment that was under development. They were trying to figure out automated ways to pick strawberries. That became our space. We worked with tools that came out of the members' cars that had automobiles on campus. 3/8 drive socket set, yet unknown. We did everything with half-inch, open-end, box-end wrenches, and what we could get our hands on. And after I made this delivery yesterday, I thought about putting the heads back on the car. And I ended up mooching a torque wrench out of one of the engineering labs in order to put the heads back on the car after they've been prepped for racing. So at any rate, the whole story here is that we did a whole lot with almost nothing. The support from the school was only the building. We had a lot of fun, and at this point I think I'll hand it back to Paul.
Thank you, Rick. Well, before I explain to you how we actually got possession of the car, I might want to point out what the car really was. Since we were beggars, not choosers, we were asked by Jim Miller, what configuration would you like the car in? What is it you want to race? And we were looking around at the NHRA records in those days and who was competitive and who wasn't. And the W30 guys, the 442s, there were a lot of them out there. There were a lot of professional teams running them. And the classes they ran in were pretty difficult indexes. But research showed that a W31 car, which quite frankly was pretty rare, I don't have the exact numbers, and I've never found anybody to give me the exact numbers, but we think it was over the 3-year period from 68, 69, and 70 that they built the car, less than 3,000 units were ever produced. So it was a fairly rare car. We didn't realize that till later. But it had a fairly radical engine for the street in those days. It was marginally streetable, but it ran pretty good for that class. And we ended up realizing it ran in G stock. And we decided a manual transmission over an automatic transmission. So we told Jim Miller that we would like a W31 with cold air package, a close ratio Muncie, and a 5-to-1 rear axle ratio. So that was our wish list. And when we ended up getting the car, I'm going to tell you that story in just a minute. We ended up getting a car that had been used as an engineering durability vehicle. It was originally built as a 442, so if you are astute with Oldsmobiles and you look at our pictures, you'll say that's a 442, not a W31. And it was. It started life as that. But when we received it, Oldsmobile had picked a brand new engine, a brand new trans, bell housing, flywheel, clutch, rear end, everything in the powertrain was fresh and installed in this body for us. One night, after the challenge that Jim just told you about at the bar, I was in the dorm around 9 o'clock at night, and I got a phone call from Jim Miller, and he said to me, Paul, be outside the dorm in 15 minutes and be alone. I don't want anybody with me. So he didn't tell me what was going on. I didn't suspect, I suspected, but I didn't know. But he came by in 15 minutes and he was in his engineering car. And we drove through the streets of East Lansing into Lansing. If you know your geography over there, Oldsmobile Engineering was downtown Lansing. We drove to the back of the engineering building. There was a chain link fence with a lock. He got out, he unlocked the fence. He swung the door, the gate open, and we drove the car in and parked next to this red 442. And he reached into the glove box, he pulled out the keys, and he said, "Paul, this car does not have a title. It's been sent to Lansing. The VIN number's been pulled out of the dash. A letter was sent to Lansing telling them it has been crushed and scrapped. It has no registration. It has no insurance, and it has no plates." He said, "Don't get caught." So I drove that car back to campus through the back streets of Lansing into East Lansing, where a couple of the guys met me at the wonderful workshop that Rick just told you about. We pulled it in and we started getting ready to prepare it for racing. That's how we ended up getting this car. I'm going to ask Fred Bowen, please start out and tell you what we did to prepare the car in the winter of 1970. We did get the car in January of 1970, and we raced it first in the spring of 1970. So all the preparation was done in the unheated workshop during the winter of 1970. Fred?
Thanks, Paul. Good afternoon. When we first got our car, it was far from race ready. We needed parts, we needed materials, supplies, oil, that kind of thing. So how to get that stuff? We decided that we would mount a letter writing campaign to various speed parts manufacturers and automotive fluid suppliers and explain who we were, that we were engineering students who were embarked on a racing project and we needed parts to get it going. And so we asked them for donations of parts. For instance, we needed a scatter shield, which was generously donated by Lakewood Industries. Various other things, Stuart Warner donated a tachometer to us. Airlift Company donated airbags for the rear coil springs. And through the aegis of our good friend Joe Guzik at Motor Wheel supplied Motor Wheel Spider wheels to us. And as they were a subsidiary of Goodyear, he also was able to obtain drag slicks and lightweight front runner drag tires for the car. So that's how we managed to get the equipment that we needed. Mallory donated a rev limiter for the engine that we installed, and Kendall Oil generously supplied us with oil. We got ignition parts from Axel, and there were other suppliers too numerous to mention that did help us out. We did receive some rejections from some companies, which we expected, but the response from the speed parts industry to our project was really gratifying. So when we got the car, it was far from race ready. It needed a lot of alteration and modification to get it to the point where it was ready to go. We substituted Pontiac 6-cylinder front springs for the original 442 springs so that we could achieve greater lift and weight transfer upon the starting line. And when we got the car put together, we found it was necessary due to severe wheel hop that we needed to fabricate a pinion stubber for the rear end. And that cured the wheel hop along with adjusting the air pressure in the airlift bags. So, and there were other modifications that had to be made. We converted the brakes brakes, from power disc brakes to manual drum brakes, which proved to be very marginal. And there were also modifications to the transmission and the engine parts, when we attempted to blueprint the engine for racing purposes. And Bob Dennis is going to explain some of those procedures to you. Bob?
Thanks, Fred. We studied the magazine articles that were out on Oldsmobiles similar to ours. Labadie Olds and Victor George were two I remember reading about. I did a lot of the grinding to change the 4-speed to a crash box, and we think Paul and I shared that. We're a little hazy on the memory of that. We did pay for a 3-angle valve job to be done professionally for us. We also CC'd the heads ourselves. Paul did that. The other thing, as Fred mentioned, we got a lot of speed parts given to us. We were careful to send pictures of the car back to the sponsors whenever we got their parts on the cars and their decal on the cars. So we sent out photos and thanks. And the car kept getting better, and it kept getting better looking too. And you can see that in our pictures. It looks kind of plain and primitive. I did the graphics on it initially, and I did the Dr. Oldsmobile on the deck lid, which took quite a while. I'm not certain if it was ready on the first outing. I really can't remember, but I do remember whenever I got it ready, I was there all night in the barn by myself, blowing up the little brochure with grids to make the full-size Dr. Oldsmobile. And the graphics on the side of the car, we had an initial version that were tiny letters, which our pictures show. That was embarrassing. The guys, in about 5 minutes, they said, Bob, that'll never do. So then I redid it into the larger letters that are in a lot of the pictures. And then later on, Dennis Klein redid the graphics again for the later racing. Finally, we had the car ready to take to the drag strip with these preparations. Bob Sedlak will tell you about that adventure.
Thank you, Bob. It was April of 1970, and after working all winter, the car was ready to go. Unfortunately, we didn't have a trailer or a way to get the car to the track for our first test at Onondaga Dragway. One of the engineering students said, my father has an old trailer in the field on his farm in Hastings, Michigan. So I drove out there with my 1963 Dodge wagon that you could throw grapefruits through holes in the front fender. And we pulled this trailer with a tractor out of the field. It was covered with mud. We kicked the mud and debris off of it, hooked it up to the wagon, and drove it back. Well, we overlooked a couple of important things. One, the trailer didn't have any brakes. And two, the trailer weighed as much as the tow vehicle, probably around 3,000 pounds, because it was all angle iron and really thick wood. So we put the W31 on this trailer and towed it out to Onondaga Dragway. However, on the way, there was a minor speed bump in the road, essentially. The trailer was very unstable, and I thought it was just a windy day, but I looked back in the rearview mirror, and there was no car and no trailer. And I looked in the side view mirror, and there it was, trying to pass. So Paul was in the passenger seat. I was the driver of this old wagon, and Paul, in his usual command voice, indicated the procedure that might get us out of this mess that we were in. Essentially, drive and accelerate out of the resonance that was going on.
Paul was yelling.
Bob was sitting in the back seat. So we figured out a speed that we could drive and not get into the resonance, or if we had to go uphill and drive past the resonance so that we wouldn't be in a very tenuous position. When we got to the track, it was noted that the trailer didn't have any fender covers over the wheels, and the oscillation had moved the car enough so that some of the rubber on the trailer tires deposited themselves on the side of the door, which I guess was okay because worse things could have happened. Well, this is the trailer of doom, and because of this poor experience, we decided never to use the trailer of doom again, and we decided flat towing might be the best option. And Al Wilson's going to explain that procedure.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I joined the group shortly after we received the car in the winter of 70. And I had very little knowledge on cars. I was a drag race enthusiast, so I could do basic maintenance and change tires and that sort of thing. So to me, this was a learning experience, and I learned a lot from this experience. I went on to continue with that knowledge, and I rebuilt several motors, and I'm currently, I think, the only one drag racing still. So I run in this out of super shock steers. I still drag racing. And so to me, I took over the towing duties. That's one thing I do. I flat towed with a 6-4 Plymouth, and we went to several tracks in the lower Michigan area, Martin and Milan, Onondaga, Tri-City Dragway, which isn't open any longer. And of course, the Roman experience, which that's another story. So I took over the towing duties until Cliff Grumpke, who's not here. He finally got a 69 Cutlass S, and he took the towing duties over after that because that's a more appropriate car. And I'll let Bob Sink talk about some of the later experiences we had after I graduated in '72.
Hi, I'm Bob Sink. I didn't get involved until a lot of the stuff had already happened as far as getting the car and early prep and all that. But in '71, when some of these guys had graduated, through that summer, MSU decided they didn't want us on campus at all. So they just said, get your car and get it out of here. We ended up having Oldsmobile had donated a trailer to us. It was a 3-axle. I thought it was blue. The guys had told me it was green. Old age, I guess. But it fully enclosed, and we had convinced the DPW yard at MSU to let us park the trailer there, and we used that for part of the time as a garage for the car. So we put it in there, and then we yank it out and take it wherever we could to work on it. A lot of times outside. The other thing that kind of happened was that at that end of that year, we used a commuter lot at MSU on the south end of the campus as our training grounds. And during one of those runs on a Friday night, we blew an engine, a big bang, pulled the car over to the side, and we were at 10 o'clock at night, we're pulling spark plugs, looking down cylinders, and the guy that was looking down at it says, I see the crank. So we had lost the piston, chewed it up, threw it in the pan. We ended up taking it to my parents' farm north of Owasso, Michigan, to pull the engine, pushed it into a barn until we could get a new engine from Olds, and dropped it back in that way. So that's kind of some of the later stuff that kind of happened after some of the early guys took over. So I think it's back to Bob.
Well, that's kind of our story as to how we got the car and what happened during the period of the group, which was roughly 69 through 74. And after Casey and Diego and Ryan pulled us all together, we started asking the question, what happened to that car? We all lost touch with it in about 1974. we've had discussions among ourselves for years, but nobody ever had any recollection of where that car went. So Dennis Klein took it upon himself primarily to start a search, and for the past almost 1 year, he's been interviewing people and searching, and he has quite an interesting story to tell about what happened since 1974. Dennis?
Thank you, Paul. So I'm the non-engineer in the group. The way I got involved with the group, I had a industrial design major to become a car designer, and one of my roommates was an engineer. He said, "Hey, you like cars? You need to go to the engineering building. They're recruiting members for a race team." And I ran down to the engineering building and talked to a guy, and he said, "Yeah, if you get on this team and work on the car, you can actually get engineering credit for racing." And I think I said, say what now? Engineering credit that I needed to have a minor in engineering. So I tried to figure out what kind of value add I could add to this team. The car was already built, they were already racing it, and I offered up my design capabilities to re-letter the car in more of a psychotic Smothers Brothers type of modern lettering. Did that, and I did appreciate Bob Dennis's graphics on the trunk of Dr. Oldsmobile, but I did notice that Dr. Oldsmobile was doing this and all the graphics that I had seen, and Bob had removed one of Dr. Oldsmobile's fingers. I'm sure it just peeled off, but anyway, that was my first exposure. And then the first night of the group met, we were doing test launches in the commuter parking lot at Michigan State University. This is an open header drag race car, and I went out there to be a participant in the test launches. And somebody said, "Would you like to ride in the car?" I said, "Sure." And open headers, late at night, very high RPM launches, and we took off, and I just fell in love with the noise of an open header car screaming across the commuter lot. And in our headlights, I saw a flash of light. And I quickly realized it was a chain blocking our way, which then Bob slammed on the brakes. We slid all the way to the chain as I had visions of being decapitated the first time I was ever in a race car. The chain came up the hood, smacked the windshield, and only cracked the windshield. So I lived to tell the story of that one. So as Diego brought this group together with Casey and Ryan, there were several meetings, and I think I joined the group in the third meeting, where several of us old members were together trying to remember all the stories and details. And a fellow walked in that was a team member up to 1974, and this gentleman started having recollections that none of us had had. And one of the first things he said is, "Well, you know that the car still exists, right?" And we all stopped drinking our beer and eating our pizza and looked at him and said, "What?" And he says, "Yeah, I saw it in 2009 on East Grand River Road in Lansing, Michigan, in a Demmer Corporation parking lot." In a Demmer, of course, I'm assuming there's some Oldsmobile enthusiasts in this room, or you wouldn't be sitting here, or your feet are really tired, one or the other. But Demmer, of course, built the Hearst Oldsmobiles. So his story immediately got our attention. And I started thinking to myself, well, if it was seen in 2009, this car might exist. I want to go on a barn find hunt for the car. The story of how the car was made, how we got it was well documented, but finding the car, that was the challenge that I wanted to be involved in. And I found that finding a almost 50-year-old car that you abandoned on a major college campus that didn't have a title or a VIN number is a really hard thing to do. It's not finding a needle in a haystack, it's much, much harder. So one of the first things that I realized was we had to have some exposure to other people, like-minded people that might know something about the car. We thought it would be easy to connect with the Demmer family. We wrote them emails, we called them. Paul Arand actually graduated with the older Demmer son, and we were certain that these like-minded car aficionados would call us right back and say, "Yeah, that car was at our parking lot," or "No, we don't know anything about it." Well, that didn't happen. So I put an ad on Craigslist. That's the modern way to communicate when you're looking for a 50-year-old lost car. That we wanted information about the car. And immediately I started getting leads. People with information about seeing the car, knowing who raced the car, etc. And I started to classify those leads into categories of how I wanted to process the information and go find these players that might know something. So with the Craigslist ad, I started thinking about who else might know about this car. It might be MSU professors. Well, the MSU professors were all deceased. It might be the rest of our team members. And we started locating different team members. And there are still some ex-team members or lost team members that we haven't found. And just a week ago, we found that Paul Genelosi was also a team member. And then we talked to veteran racers like Bill Porterfield. Dick Fortman was reportedly had some involvement with the car. And one by one, they were either deceased or they didn't know anything about the car, couldn't remember anything about it. Then I went to younger racers because I got a lead that the car was being raced by a young man near Saginaw, Michigan. Track that down. No, that was not our car. And then the Oldsmobile enthusiast circle really started coming to the front. And you guys in the Oldsmobile community are the tightest group of car enthusiasts I've ever met in my life. One by one, I would get calls and they would all mention the same names. Dick Fortman, Bill Porterfield, and oddly enough, one of our team members and our OEM sponsor, industry sponsor, Joe Guzik. And I found out that Joe Guzik was involved in everything in Lansing. This was the guy that worked for Motor Wheel and Goodyear. Calvin Badgley, Judy Badgley, who were involved in the Ransom Olds Foundation and gave me all kinds of leads. Margaret Kerr, who was a Lansing area photographer and involved with the R.E. Olds Museum. And then we started surfacing ex-Oldsmobile employees, engineers, racers, tradespeople, engine builders. We found a guy who thinks he has our engine. And he has a unique engine that has an extra casting number. Olds restorers, a fellow by the name of Bob Reed near Jackson that has painted literally 30 or 40 Olds 442s. And we found out that the sponsors that we had way back in 1970, 71, 72 were still in business in Lansing. And we went and talked to Denny, who used to own Denny Sunoco, and Roy Johnson, who owned Johnson's Speed Shop. They said, well, you need to go talk to Joe Guzik. Well, we talked to Joe Guzik. And then we tried harder to press the Demmer family for some sort of response. I talked to Ed Demmer, but we could not get anybody to acknowledge the car was out there. And then the Lansing State Journal got involved. They wrote a front page story about the missing Oldsmobile and the alumni team that was looking for it. And when they did that, we got an interesting call. I got a call from a gentleman who said, hey, I know where your car is, or at least I know where it was in 2013. And he identified a storage building in Lansing off of Grand River Avenue that might be owned by the Demmer family. So we went and looked at that. And then we had a great opportunity to be in Muscle Car Review. And as Muscle Car Review put an 8-page story out, even more sightings started coming our way. So the story of the car is that we've gotten a lot of leads, and each of those leads have given us some information that we didn't have. But we still had not heard from the car other than these sightings since 1974. I got a call from a gentleman who's an engineer at GM who said, hey, I saw the car in 1977 in a Marathon gas station in Haslett, Michigan. Tried to find the owner of that Marathon gas station. He was deceased. But his wife was involved in the gas station. Called her, she couldn't remember. She said, you need to talk to my son. He was 18 at the time. Tracked the son down, and I said, were you familiar with this car that was at your dad's gas station? And he said, no, know nothing about it. And I said, you were 18 years old, your dad had a race car in his gas station, and you know nothing about it. And I thought I had trapped him. And he said, Actually, I moved to Denver, Colorado for 10 years, so I was gone. So I could go on all afternoon here about all the leads. We keep thinking we're going to surface somebody that knows something about it, somebody that raced it, or somebody that crushed it, somebody that was at a salvage yard, or perhaps even somebody that's got it. And if we find that car, I guarantee you, we'll be back next year. Our banner won't say lost, it'll say found. Thank you.
We call him Inspector Clouseau, or Dennis Magnum PI. He's just incredible when it comes to tracing these leads down. He spent a tremendous amount of time, his own personal time, doing this, and we honestly think that maybe as a result of events like this and publications, we might eventually be able to bring that car here to the show. So that's kind of our dream. At this point in time, any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to hear. Give us your best shot. Ryan's got a mic. Raise your hand.
I think the mic is on, so we're good.
Who was the main driver most of the time in this game?
The way we approached this entire project was, this was a team effort. We were the W31 team. We welcomed everybody that wanted to come and participate. We even welcomed non-engineers. And the way we prepared the car, the way we took the task to go find parts for the car, everybody that wanted to be involved was involved. And we treated the driving the same way. Everybody that wanted an opportunity to drive the car was given the opportunity to drive the car. This project started in the bar in 1969 and ended roughly sometime in 1973. And over the time, there were at least three graduating classes. So I would say most everybody on the team had the opportunity. There was really no primary.
You mentioned Roy Johnson and Johnson's Speed Shop. When did he start the Speed Shop? Was he in business when you guys were doing this? And you took advantage of him being one of the Speed Shop?
Does anybody know when he started business? The answer is he was in business in 1969 because he contributed some parts or something to the car. Nobody remembers exactly what, but
He gave us M&H slips for the car.
we went to, Dennis and I have been on a field trip on one of these searches, and we stopped in front of Johnson's Speed Shop and walked in the door, and of course Roy Johnson was standing there, and he gave us all the time we wanted. He gave us a tour of the speed shop. If anybody doesn't know Johnson's Speed Shop and happens to be in the Lansing area, you want to see what a speed shop looked like in 1962, go in that shop. I mean, it'll take you back to the Gratiot Auto Supply days. He's got an incredible speed shop, brick and mortar like you don't see anymore, and he's got thousands of square feet of warehouse space in the back with parts as far back as flathead Fords.
On the comment on Johnson's Speed Shop, that we showed that credit, and I think it was the later guys who put it on the quarter panel, because there was no decal. We had things like mechanical engineering there, Lowell Automotive. When the later photo was found of the car in Hazlitt, somebody had all those credits removed from the rear quarter, those small lines that you see in the photos, they'd taken them all off. But I noticed Johnson's Speed Shop just looking at those later credits the guys had done. But they were gone on the later photo. And the car had bigger tires on it than 7-inch. Two things are tied together in my mind that they took the credits off.
Where is the vehicle? I know that well. I just looked down the road from Johnson's Speed Shop. It's a great source of parts. Wealth of knowledge as well. He knows everybody that sees that. And then I just wanted to ask, how are you? How are you run?
By the way, Jim Menaker, can't have the mic yet. Jim Menaker is our professional driver in the group. He spent his career at General Motors. He was a 24-hour driver, winner. He set numerous Bonneville speed records. He's a 200-mile-an-hour license holder, and he was inducted in the Corvette Hall of Fame about a year ago.
Yeah. Thanks. So we briefly told the story that we tried to build this car as an NHRA legal car, and it was, right? There was no funny business. The compression ratio wasn't high. We did import it. We did the 3-angle valve job that we were allowed. We did skin the heads to maximize the chamber right to the limit. The intake manifold was the way it was supposed to be. We had the right part number carburetor on it, and so on and so forth. And at the time, now we've debated this in the last year that we've been pulled together. What was the national record? And Diego went on a big search because I thought we were closer to the national record than we actually were. We ran about 13 flat on what I thought was a 1280 record. The record was 1228 in the spring of 1970 when we were starting to run. So we weren't far off. We weren't as close as I thought we were. We never went to the nationals, but we won quite a bit regionally against cars, same kind of cars that were competitive in G7. So we accumulated some trophies and did pretty well. There's a car over there, we're trying to compare notes. We got a national dragster at this meet from the spring, and Bob found it and bought it, and that's where we realized that was a national record in the spring. There's a car over there in the barn finds. It's a Herschel's big block car, D-stock automatic. They've got all the runs, all the stickers from the national meets, dozens of them in there. And that car ran 1293. D-E-F-G, right? So we ran 13 flat, and they were running 1290s, 1270s. Wasn't bad. We did a lot more to the car than some of the guys have talked about here. We didn't know all the tricks. As Bob said, we knew what we could read and talk to other racers, right? We had 90-10 shocks on the front, 50-50 in the rear. Rick had actually built steel bushings. We pushed the rubber bushings out of the rear control arms and pushed in steel bushings that Rick had machined in this dirt ball garage that we had. Pushed them in right there. And you can see the car, how well it rotates, right? I mean, when you slam the throttle, drop the clutch, it was headed for the sky. The thing would almost pull the front wheels, and did very well. 5-1 final drag. We made a crash box. We made a crash box, right? Machined synchronizers, put the teeth on synchronizers, and hand ground the sliders. Hand ground.
For hours and hours.
Yeah, to get every other tooth off the slider, right? So you had to pull it hard. I think the first outing or one of the outings, somebody said we ought to put out automatic transmission fluid in it. It'll work even. Yeah. First outing, knocked the gears out of it, right? And we're back to Oldsmobile with our hand, and hey, we're still learning. Screwed up the transmission. Would you give us a transmission? And then pulled those, at least the sliders. I don't think we went back and cleaned up the
I don't remember the second transmission. I think we did not do it.
Yeah, I think we just we just moved the sliders over because they were okay, but we didn't clean up the synchronizers. And then we put regular transmissions. Away we went. Never broke an axle, as far as I know, right? 5-1 gear, which was legal because it was a trailer towing option. Good combination with the tire size we had. We went through the track at about 6,200, which was 100 RPM below the red line.
I just want to ask another question. Did you keep the original factory engine when you were a stock W31 camshaft despite the
Question on camshaft. I think it was kept the camshaft the same.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and I don't think we indexed it at all, as far as I recall. I mean, we had the only money we had was there was dues involved in this student SAU chapter. They've been collecting $10 a year for 100 years.
It was old money.
See, it was old money. We had a whole $1,000, right? And we spent every penny on it, most of it on the machine work and cylinders that we couldn't do it ourselves. And the rest of it was either donated or we did it ourselves.
Hey guys, a couple few questions. So a few of your leads revolve around Demmer. What's the backstory there? Have you substantiated any of that? Have you been able to actually talk to somebody? Because it sounds like some of your leads tie that car to...
Yes. So maybe Dennis wants to pick up on this because he's been our historian. But Denver built the Herschels, right? They also were the backyard shop for Olds Engineering, right? We were told by a reliable source that if a car went out of Olds Engineering, it passed through Denver on its way to racers. That isn't true on one occasion, for sure. Smothers Brothers cars, right, went through Denver. And Denver did something to them before they went to Smothers Brothers. In fact, one of those cars belongs to the sister of Bill Denver, the guy we've been trying to get hold of. We've traced that down. So Denver has, they have a nice connection to Oldsmobile.
Why is it so difficult to get a hold of them? Do you think they have the car? What do you guys think there?
That's what we're trying to find out. And we have since got in touch with Bill Denver within the last week. And I don't know if we want to divulge the way we got to. Probably not. But we have now spoken with Bill Denver, and he's agreed to take a look. I mean, as it turns out, Bill is a businessman. He's not as interested in cars as the rest of us, as it turns out. They have a lot of cars in the family, and he's not very interested in it. And I hope I'm not telling stories out of school about Bill. We graduated with Bill. And so he's a Spartan, and we love him to death. But they have this inventory of cars, and that's what he knows. He says, I got the book here somewhere. Can you tell me again what the car was? So I said, we'll get you a picture. We'll get you a good picture. You can look at the car. Apparently their inventory book has got pictures, what the car is, where the car is, and so on. Because they've got cars in Florida, they've got cars in northern Michigan, they got cars in shops around the Lansing area, because they still own property and businesses and so on and so forth.
Any other people want to ask questions? Very good. Oh, there we go. The older. We're the same age. Anyway, I was just curious about any stories about some of your drag strip forays, especially about Broman. Somebody mentioned Broman drag strip. I was just kind of curious to hear more about that.
I think Bob is probably the most appropriate person because he was the driver at the track.
That's my experience. The car had terrible brakes. We told you that before. They're manual drums. And I think Fred, I, and Al were there, I think was right at that day. We went to one place to grab, and we went on from there to Broman and ended up racing at Broman. And I found out as I was at the top end of the run that Broman had very little shutdown area. Not only did they not have much shutdown area, but they defined the lot line to the farmer next by big high piles of dirt. So I'm standing on the brakes for all I'm worth, and I just barely made the U-turn at the end. I really thought I was going to go through the piles of dirt. Narrowly missed doing that.
Thanks, appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the only time the car was taken to that track. Any other questions, anybody?
Very good. Maybe Diego wants to hop up and just kind of wrap up.
Hey guys, in case you aren't aware, it's time for me to pedal my boat again. Bye from me after this summer. But I'd also like to thank Casey and Ryan, because without them, I would have not been able to do this. I mean, really, it's not me, it's all of us. But another great thing about this is we brought these gentlemen together for the first time in 45 years or so. So it's like a college reunion that they didn't know they were going to have. But I'd also like to thank you guys, because if you weren't here, we wouldn't be here to tell the story. So thank you very much. And enjoy the show.